our objectives. At the end of the lesson, we should be able to discuss the significant event that took place along with the spread of Western science and investigate the birth of an independent scientific tradition in some Asian countries. Hello everyone, I am Dorothy Harriet Cabante and I will be discussing the first phase of Western imperialism. But before that, so we could understand our discussion better, let us start with the scientific revolution. So what is this scientific revolution? So, scientific revolution, mauni ang nag-establish sa philosophical perspectives, mga experimental activities, and social institutions nga karon ginatawag nato og modern science. So, kaning scientific revolution, it took place in the rather tiny geographic area nga gina-occupy sa mga Western European nations. So, daghan na nga mga scientists ang nag-try to explain why modern science first developed inside the constrained borders of Western Europe. Pero gamay ra ang nag-discuss or nag-focus sa discussion on how did modern science spread from the Western Europe and find its place in the rest of the world. So, the answer is that modern science or Western science is transmitted directly from Western European nations to any locations outside of Europe. But through what ways? So, through military conquest, imperial influence, commercial, political relations, and missionary activities. So, through this, the Western European nations were in a position to transmit their scientific legacy to a larger world. So, although this straightforward statement is generally accurate, it is completely devoid of any specifics like si kinsay nagpalaganap sa Western science. Unsa nga mga branches sa science ang ilang gipalaganap? Unsa nga mga adjustments ang nahitabo sa Western science during sa transmission? Ug giun sa pag-usab ang rapidly expanding scientific tradition sa mga non-European nations or societies. So in this discussion, we will try to understand these topics. So, there are three phases in Western imperialism. So, modern science is introduced in the non-European nations using these three stages. So, during the phase 1, non-scientific nations or societies or countries serve as a source for European science. And the phase 2 and 3 of the transplantation process are characterized by periods of colonial science and the quest for an independent scientific tradition or culture. So, these three curves provide a convenient representation of these stages. So, diba, there's this fact that we should consider both quantitative and qualitative aspects when we define a scientific activity. But these curve forms weren't determined in a strictly quantitative manner. Tapos, these curves outline a generalized method that needs to be adjusted to fit particular circumstances. So, the first phase begins when the Europeans travels to non-scientific nations and then they study about the flora and fauna, the physical aspects of the nations, and then returns to Europe with the findings of their research to begin the transmission process. So, the term non-scientific refers to the absence of the Western science. Dili pasabot na walay science nga nag-exist sa ilaha. So, some of the non-European regions have civilizations nga nagikan pa sa mga ancient civilizations. And we define civilization as a sophisticated human culture that often consists of several cities and has went through specific stages of cultural and technological development. Ibig sabihin, naanay technology. Again, technology is the application of science. So therefore, naay science ani nga mga nations. They were just labeled non-scientific because of the absence of contemporary Western science. During this stage, kay tungod lagi new land, daghan kaayo sila studihan nga mga life forms, species, and as well as the physical features of the land. That's why botany, zoology, and geology are predominant. astronomy, geophysics, and a group of geographical sciences like topography, cartography, hydrography, meteorology can at times be as influential. So, when present, these branches of science are not present all the time. But ang katong mga civilizations nga naanay record sa ilahang past or sa ilang ancient civilizations, they will clearly hold a supporting role. So what are these branches? So when present, it's anthropology, ethnology, and archaeology. They will come in the second most important or most practice scientific activity. So, the trained scientists or the amateurs who first encounter the newly opened territory in the capacity of an explorer, a traveler, a missionary, diplomat, doctor, trader, or military, artist, or adventurer may conduct these varied scientific research. Science training and experience will heighten the European observer's appreciation of the significance and novelty of his discoveries. But they are not the pivotal factors. The fact that the observer is a part of a scientific culture that values the methodical investigation of nature is what's significant. So, in its early stages, science is a continuation of geographical exploration and includes the evaluation of natural sciences, surveying, categorizing, and evaluating the organic and inorganic surroundings are initially necessary. So, biskang unsa pa nga geographical location ang ma-explore or ma-discover, apil jud sa una nga i-test ang iyang natural resources pati ang mga organic and inorganic surroundings ana niya. So, unsa may mga examples. So, katong New World nga karon ginatawag na og America, sa Africa, ang Antarctica, pati ang Moon or ang laing planets like Mars, gina-survey jud na siya. Then gina-evaluate. Now, the observers will likely listen to the advice of Sir Francis Bacon nga iyang gihatag sa mga colonial planters atong 17th century. They will likely follow his advice if the area under surveillance or observation is ever to become a settlement for European colonists. So what did Sir Francis Bacon said? First, he told them to look for what kind of food does the country supplies of itself, and then to consider what products the soil naturally produces so they can aid in some manner to reduce or offset the cost of the plantation. So the study of botany, zoology, and geology is directly related sa pagpangita sa mga foodstuffs and natural goods na pwede ma-export. Kining phase 1, it can exist in uncivilized and civilized nations. Mag-exist ni siya sa mga lugar na naanay mga sariling practices and beliefs that has been going on for years. Examples are India and China. These nations were continuously in contact with the Western Europeans that they fell into their scrutiny. Although the potential for trade sa ilang continuous contact sa India and China, ang bali lang ginapakita nga nung interested ka sila sa ilang natural resources, it wasn't the main driving force. So, the European observer's exploration of a new phase is influenced by trade and the possibilities of colonization. But, in the end, his effort must be connected to the scientific culture he represents. So, the scientific revolution was embodied by observers, a remarkable series of events that showed Western man that the physical universe could be best understood and controlled via direct, hands-on observation of natural phenomena rather than just mere guesses. The plants, animals, and landscape of Europe had revealed their secrets to this method of inquiry. If so, mas daghan og ma-reveal ang isa ka new land through this method as well. There are several instances in history of European naturalists nga nagagather, ga-identify, and ga-classify sa mga plant and animal species nga ilahang ma-discover sa far-off jungles, deserts, mountains, and plains before nila ipublish ilahang findings for the benefit of the European scientific community. So we begin in the Americas with Gonzalo Fernandez de Oviedo. He was the first naturalist of the New World, and his book on the natural history of the West Indies in 1535. From Oviedo during the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, a steady stream of Spanish, French, German, Dutch, Swedish, and English naturalists went on scientific expeditions to South America. Early in the 19th century, this movement achieved its peak thanks to the writings of Charles Darwin and Alexander von Humboldt. A North American group of collectors, geologists, and surveyors can be traced back to Thomas Harriot. He is a traveler and author of the 16th century who wrote on the natural resources and residents of Virginia. The mission of enhancing European understanding of the natural history of the northeastern and southeastern United States was carried out in the 18th century. Um, it was done by the American colonial naturalists working alongside their counterparts in Europe. In this scientific endeavor, well-known names like Mark Catesby, John and William Bartram, Alexander Garden, Peter Kalm, and John Clayton may be found. So the area east of the Mississippi River had been explored by 1800s, and attention was now turning to the western area. So the United States eastern and middle west regions had been hit by the flood of contemporary science that had swept across Europe. So during the 19th century, a series of government supported and privately funded exploratory expeditions pushed science beyond the Mississippi, advancing it further west. So, the Phase 1 science was conducted in the American West, beginning with Lewis and Clark and continuing with John Wesley Powell's voyage up the Colorado River. However, rather than in the more established scientific centers of Western Europe, London, Paris, and Berlin, the benefactors of this research resided in the eastern United States in Boston, Philadelphia, and Washington, the up and coming counterparts of the older capitals. So, as the transmission process moved from the second to the third phase, this area was now in a position to act as a center for the dissemination of modern science. So, the time lag between phases in the various American areas has had an impact on the current scientific environment. There is an equal distribution of scientific centers of excellence around the nation since certain regions have begun the process of transplanting and developing science later than the others. So, three exploratory expeditions led by Captain James Cook between 1768 and 1780 offered scientists in Europe to access to the Pacific Ocean. Sir Joseph Banks accompanied Cook on his first journey, and it was he who uncovered the botanical, zoological, and ethnological marvels of the Australian continent. Um, and then the botanist Robert Brown was motivated by Banks' success to collect some 3,900 species of Australian plants, which led to the publication of the well-known book Prodromos Florae Novae Hollandiae et Insulae Vandimen in 1810. So, Sir Joseph Dalton Hooker and Alfred Russel Wallace were to make important scientific discoveries later in the century based on their collecting missions in Antarctica, and that was in 1839 to 1843, and the Malay Archipelago, respectively, that was 1856 to 1862. After that, China, India, and Japan created additional obstacles to the spread of Western knowledge. These were ancient civilized peoples, unlike the primordial ones found elsewhere. However, the first Europeans to travel there began the surveying and gathering of plant and animal species that has continuously marked their early interaction with the new land. Natural history was studied in Japan before Christian missionaries arrived there in the late 16th century, but gradually Europeans with their superior classificatory methods came to dominate this native activity. Um, Two Germans named Andreas Kleyer and Engelbert Kampfer are well known for their botanical studies they conducted in Japan in the 17th century. The Dutch East India Company's Carl Peter Thunberg and Philip Franz von Siebold, they are two medical officers that made substantial contributions to the study of Japanese natural history in the century that has followed. Um, when the Jesuits introduced Western concepts to China in 1583, it opened up a world for new possibilities for European scientists. However, these missionaries are best known for introducing Copernicus and Galileo's new astronomy to the educated men of China, despite the fact that their letters and diaries attest to their interest in the biological and geological sciences. So, in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, hundreds of European scientists went to China to expand the early missionary study of natural history. So, a two-volume history of European botanical discoveries in China comprises nearly 1,000 pages devoted to a list of these Europeans' names and accomplishments alone. Daghang kayo. So, demonstrating how passionate they were about botany. When the Portuguese, who were seeking the spice trade, created a sea passage there, the first European scientists began to travel there as well. So, when England replaced Portugal as the dominant force in the Indian politics in the 17th century, missionaries and physicians from that country assumed responsibility for researching Indian natural history. So, as the English seized control of Indian trade in the 18th century, the employees of the East India Company became naturalists. So, after assembling huge collections of flora and fauna, they hired native artists to represent the species in their right colors and biological surroundings. The company created botanic gardens in Calcutta in 1787 as a formal acknowledgement of the commercial value of the botanical work done by its staff. Sir Joseph Dalton Hooker's travels and writings, which served as the inspiration for his Flora Indica in 1855, and his botanical expedition to the Himalayas, serve as a reminder that professional scientists were also actively involved in the study of India's natural history. So, the western coast of Africa was explored by Portuguese navigators in the 15th century, but until the late 19th century, significant European contact was confined to the continent's periphery due to the easy access to gold and slaves along the coast and the presence of natural barriers to interior exploration. However, a European settlement was established in 1652 in the Cape region, which was used as a stopover for ships heading to India. Early on, South Africa attracted naturalists and astronomers who came to observe its plants and animals, its geography and geology, and its sky. South Africa also offered communities of European settlers and the benefits of a southerly location for telescopic observation. So, a small group of scientists from France, England, Sweden, and Denmark started a more thorough research of the natural history of the African continent in the second half of the 18th century. So, Napoleon Bonaparte undertook the most ambitious scientific mission of the 18th century as part of his military war in Egypt in 1798. That happened in 1798 to 1801. So, Geoffrey Saint Hilaire, a naturalist assigned to the Napoleonic expedition, gathered Egyptian plants and animals, devoting particular attention to the indigenous species. So, his colleagues, some of whom who were French scientists of the time, studied the Egyptian soil and water, and as well as observed the stars, sketched and collected Egyptian artifacts, and studied astronomy, creating the groundwork for contemporary Egyptology. So, this brief history of the world should not lead one to believe that phase one was only practiced between the 16th and the middle of the 19th century.
Das Deutsche Kolonialreich.
A work that includes investigations by zoologists, botanists, geologists, and geographers was her assessment of Germany's colonial wealth at the end of the 19th century, when Germany had become an imperial force after acquiring territory in Africa and the Pacific. So, the current requirement for natural history research in impoverished area and the potential for lunar and planetary exploration after the Phase 1 scientists' new challenges. So, for the benefit of its experts, all of the plant, animal, and mineral specimens collected in the other countries, as well as the data gathered there, were sent back to Europe or later to the United States. Even while Phase 1 knowledge is dispersed throughout the world, only countries with a contemporary scientific culture can properly understand, assess, and exploit it. So, it was understood as early as the 17th century that interaction with other regions would inevitably had an impact on domestic scientific advancement. So the maritime nations were most appropriately positioned, according to Bishop Spratt, to bring home material for new sciences and to make the same proportion of discoveries in the intellectual world as they have in the physical. So the matter that the collector sent back, which filled the zoological and botanical gardens, herbariums, and museums of Europe, rendered obsolete the classification schemes created for the continent's flora and fauna, sparked new research on plant and animal geography, and had a significant impact on the Darwinian theory of organic evolution. So, a scientist who travels on an exploratory voyage frequently discovers that his own scientific beliefs are altered by the knowledge gained from studying natural history in a different country. During his time in Senegal, Michel Adanson made the observation that really botany seems to change face entirely as soon as one leaves their temperate countries. According to Sir James E. Smith in 1793, who lived far away around the world in Australia, agreed. He said that when a botanist first enters such remote a country as New Holland, he finds himself in a new world. He can scarcely meet with any fixed points from whence to draw his analogies. So, as a result, European science underwent a significant transformation as it was being diffused to a wider world. So, that is the phase one. It includes the exploration, the gathering of data of the Western Europeans from the rest of the world in the country. So as these scientists discover new information, their knowledge or the science, European science, will undergo significant transformation as it is being diffused to the rest of the world. And that's it.